I make good money, but I still feel broke. I don't understand where it all goes. It feels like as soon as I receive it, poof, it's gone. Does this sound familiar? I work with so many mompreneurs who make good money, six figures, and yet they have no idea where it went. Why? Because they're not tracking their finances. They're not paying attention to it. They're not giving every dollar a job before it even comes in. All businesses need two things: a business plan and a financial plan. If you're not sure where your money is going, then I'm inviting you to join my school community, The Smell of Money, where we dive into exactly where your money is going and we start to look at how you think and react to the money that you're receiving and paying out so that money flows in all ways, always. Join today. The link is in the comments. When you think about your profit margin goal, what comes to mind first? And a lot of you are working your 9 to 5, trying to launch your business, and you're in hustle mode. You're thinking, I need more money. In reality, you don't need more money. You need to pay attention to the money that you have. And when you think about reinventing yourself, what comes to mind? How many times are you going to start all over? Burn it down, start again.
Cash flow, confidence, wealth. Welcome to I Date Money. If you're making money but still wondering where it all went, if you're ready to organize your cash flow, build confidence with money, and create lasting wealth, you're in the right place. I'm Lisa Drennon, wealth activator, creator of the Money Multiplier System, and founder of the Smell of Money community. If you're a multi-passionate female entrepreneur who's making money but not building wealth, this podcast is for you. Each week, you'll discover practical strategies to organize your cash flow, keep more of what you earn, eliminate debt, and build lasting wealth with confidence. So grab your favorite essential oil, take a deep breath, and let's sniff our way to cash flow, confidence, and wealth.
Today, we are going to be spending some time with Natalie Holder, who is an employment lawyer who coaches professionals through workplace trauma to reinvention. Whether you have concerns about job security or are fatigued by being passed over, ignored, and underestimated at work, Natalie helps to reveal the unseen path to a more fulfilling and impactful future. And I know a lot of you are like, well, I like my 9 to 5 and I want to retire. And maybe just holding on to that job is really keeping you from being impactful. So thank you, Natalie, so much for being here. Tell us a little bit about how you got started and what made you fall into this specific niche.
How did it all start? Quite honestly, it started out by being in a role, in a position that I really did not adore. I thought that this was just one of the worst jobs ever. However, it was probably the best thing that ever happened for me. I started my career with the government, which was exactly the opposite of where I thought I would start my career. I thought I'd be at an AmLaw 100 top law firm, working 80 hours a week. Instead, I was with the government, working very reasonable hours and also working with very reasonable people. And I fell into this area of employment law, probably because it's a social determinant of health. And I come from a family of doctors and nurses. And so the idea of me not going to medical school was my family's, it was my family's disappointment. And so I think that my way of giving back was, as an attorney, helping people through their employment issues, because we all understand that our employment really does impact so much of what we can and cannot do in this society, particularly when it comes to health. It impacts whether or not we have health insurance. It impacts what kind of doctors we can see. It impacts whether or not we do go to the doctor. And so while working in the government, I fell into this area and became the go-to attorney when it came to mediating and settling employment disputes. And even though I was supposed to also handle issues of public accommodations and also issues of housing, I never did, because I really enjoyed the employment aspect so much, helping people to figure out what can they and what can they not do in the workplace.
And that's so important, because I think a lot of people, go to work and there's a set of rules and you don't want to upset, we don't want to rock the boat. I retired from the Social Security Administration, so I'm really familiar with all the government, do's and don'ts and the regulations, and absolutely loved that career. It was amazing and was able to help so many people. But there's a lot of people who get up every single day and go into a job that they don't like. And I think it keeps them silent. It's almost like your throat closes and, oh, I can't ask for that. but it really has nothing to do with the job itself. It just has to do with that person. So what did you find most common in your work that seemed to be the theme song, especially for women, that they played that kept them from rising and making an impact?
Much of it was fear. Fear of, am I going to leave something that I know for something that is unknown? And in my own life, I've taken risks. They're my risks. They're risks that work well for me. And I don't in any way try to, impart that on anyone else. I'm a big believer in taking risks, mainly because I'm a woman of faith. And I do believe that I will always land on my feet. And so, as we talk about, being, you being at the Social Security Administration, you know how it was being in an agency, and where normally once people stayed in, their government roles for like 5 years, you had them until retirement.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a good thing, sometimes if that's your goal and your dream, because many people that I found in the government, these were people who understood that by a certain date, they need to retire because they start losing money when they continue working. And so these are people who are also designing what will life be like after I retire, because many of these people, and Lisa, you look very young, many of these people retired at like age 45. They were retiring well before 50. And so you have a whole second life ahead of you
Mm-hmm.
when you're thinking about retiring at that age. And so ironically, I found that people in the government were very strategic with figuring out what is the next step going to be. Unlike many of my colleagues who were in private sector roles, and where I found that they were somewhat tied to what were called the golden handcuffs. And that, I feel, are the fears that keep us in roles that don't necessarily work for us. They're high paying roles, but they're roles that aren't really fulfilling for us. And so when we realize this organization is not working for us, we'll move to another organization, but it's a different cast of characters, but the same ethos that isn't really working for us. And so I find that there are these patterns that people will repeat if they're not honest about what the signals are that are helping them to understand it's time to make a shift in time.
That's very powerful. And it is so true. I know I spent 30 years in the Social Security Administration, and regardless of, income, education, middle class, upper class, it didn't matter. They all had the same fear. Will there be enough? Can I leave? And the other fear was, if I leave, what will I do? So many people don't have an exit plan. And I think that keeps them stuck in, like, I'm afraid to retire because what will I do? And some people think they'll just die, and whatever you think is true, right? And so making that transition, where does that confidence, how does one build up that self-confidence to help them make that decision and feel safe doing it?
Understanding what your options are and even acknowledging that you have options. That's the first step. There's a wealth of information today that I don't think anyone has an excuse anymore for
Mm-hmm.
saying that they don't know what else is possible for them. Between AI, between, just general internet searches, between different social groups and different organizations, there's an opportunity for us to explore that second and that third life. It was really interesting that they were very strategic about researching what were their skill sets and what do their skill sets apply to. So, for instance, in law enforcement, I served as the chief diversity officer for the U.S. Capitol Police. And there is a colleague who I used to joke about, and I called him Three Checks, because he retired from Capitol Police. Within a year, he came back as a consultant, and he was also an adjunct professor. Three checks. Okay. And that wasn't by accident. That was by design. Normally, as you know, in the government, you can't come back into your agency,
Right.
after a certain, like, you have to wait a certain period of time. But he read the rules. He understood where there were loopholes, and he understood who to talk to get the, permissions that he needed in order to come back as a consultant. And so I would say similarly for anyone who's in a role and where they're not feeling fulfilled, the first step is to figure out, okay, so what is the signal? What is letting you and giving you the information that this is not something that's fulfilling you? Whether it's the amount of money that you're making, whether it's the people that you're working with, whether it's the mission. Maybe you don't believe in the organizational mission anymore. Maybe you're encountering some of the, what I call the 10 indicators of a broken workplace culture. Maybe you're encountering those. And when you do encounter those, whatever your signal is, the important thing is to figure out, okay, this is what's helping me to understand I need to shift and make a move.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, it's a question of just creating your inventory. What are you good at? What do you like to do? What are your skill sets? And that's where you find deficits. I was coaching a colleague recently who had spent years as a chief executive officer. And she's an incredible individual. She's led in very high level organizations, and she's also led in nonprofit organizations. And even though she has years of experience, we found a deficit for her that she has an interest in going into ESG work. However, she doesn't have the credential. She doesn't have, the coursework to help her understand some of the governance and some of the sustainability work that will be necessary for such a role. And so it was now understanding, now that we have this gap, now that we've identified it, how do we fill it? Guess what? There are great programs out there at universities that will give you a certificate. Well, you can earn a certificate in these areas, through coursework. And so it's, like I said, really figuring out that inventory, understanding where there are skill gaps, and then understanding where do you move from there.
So important. It's the same thing with finances. You have to gather the information to make a decision, and that gives us buying power. And if we don't know the options, then we're not going to be able to move forward. And I think a lot of times we are fearful of looking at those options and we think, well, it's going to take time and I'm just so tired. And we come up with so many excuses. So when you were going through this transition, and what was your personal experience about the excuses that you told yourself, and how did you work through those?
I am a huge believer in no excuses, because I come from a family that didn't believe in excuses. I am 4 generations into progress. And what I mean by that is that my great grandmother was a subsistence farmer. Her daughter moved into the city and actually migrated to, a very cosmopolitan city, and became a chambermaid. My mother went to nursing school. I went to law school. 4 generations of progress, not regress.
Mhm.
And it's, 3 generations of women that I'm following who had no excuses. The
Oh.
whole idea that I had a great grandmother, the education of a first grader, but somehow was able to negotiate powerful contracts with rum companies toward the end of her life. It's understanding that for me, there are just very few excuses. Now,
Mhm.
I'm not saying that there aren't excuses out there. However, for me, when I do feel like having a pity party, I like to surround myself with people who will jolt me back into reality. And I call them my personal board of directors. Your personal board of directors are the people who will, well, number one, the people who are invested in your career, the people who actually care about you. So we're not just going to pull in everybody for our personal board of directors, but
Mhm.
these are the people who are going to give you advice and guidance. And I do, have 4 different seats, because I do believe that there are 4 different skill sets that are needed for my personal board of directors. We're all different, and I do encourage people to do their own assessment to determine, what it means for them to have a personal board of directors. But these are the people that when you fall into a slump, they will kick you back into a gear that will make you actionable. And so for me, I have a former CEO on my board, because this is the person who helps me move from emotional language to business language. So
Mhm.
instead of whining about, "Oh, this is not fair, I don't like this, I don't want to do this," my CEO helps me to translate that into, well, the reason why this is an idea that might not be feasible for the organization is that we're going to lose market share in this area. That's what she does for me. The other person is my contrarian. This is the person who holds up a huge mirror to my blind spots and will help me understand where I am making excuses, where I'm making mistakes, where I'm not even identifying sometimes where opportunity might be. I also have what I consider to be, I'll admit I'm a little bit biased. You have to have human resources and an employment lawyer on your board of directors, because we're the people who, we've seen the severance agreements, we've seen the employment onboarding agreements, and everything in between. And so my HR contact is the person who'll say to me, "Hey, guess what? We might not want to send this email at 2 a.m. in the morning because it's not going to come across the right way." And then lastly, it's having an industry insider. This is the person who understands what's happening and going on in a particular area before it even hits the news.
Mhm.
And so combined, these are the people who really do help me to identify pitfalls, opportunities, and to communicate them. And ultimately, these are the people who help me to protect my wealth and my career aspirations.
That's so beautiful. Having a team is so important, and surrounding yourself with the right team that has the same core values and the goal, like, they're team oriented. 'Cause I know a lot of companies that you end up having somebody on the team, it doesn't mesh, and then they get nervous. Oh, I don't want to let them go. They're a good friend. I have a client whose husband is stuck in a job because it's his best friend's company. Like, you got to put these things aside if it's not making you happy. I mean, as soon as you're getting up and groveling about needing to go into work, it's a huge sign. The money's not that important, and I know everybody has to pay their bills, but your sense of peace and calmness is so much more important. It affects your health. And when you think about, looking at all these different, as an employment lawyer, looking at all these different rules and regulations that each company has set up, a lot of times the wage comes into play. A lot of people don't like their job and they always want to get a different job because they want more money. How is it that they can negotiate if they do like the company that they're working for, they believe in the values, they support the mission, they can negotiate a better salary for themselves?
It's important to understand what value are you bringing to the organization. Now, I do want to preface this by saying that we are in a very employer driven market right now, meaning that employers, companies, businesses, they have the upper hand in the employment landscape right now because there are more people looking for gainful employment than roles that are available.
Mm-hmm.
So, with that understanding, I would say that the negotiations are going to be very different than they were back in 2021 when there was a glut of opportunity out there and not enough people for those roles. In either market setting, I would still say that there are still some common denominator elements that you look for. Number one, it's understanding what is the role that you're moving into and what do you bring to it. Simply stating, I need more money because I, need more money to pay my bills and my finances. Your employer doesn't care about that. What they care about is what changes and what improvements are you going to make in their organization such that they cannot do without you. And so sometimes I tell people, you might not get the money that you're looking for, but also try to negotiate some of the benefits that you're looking for. For instance, you might want to look into whether or not you can get, more days off because time with your family, time for yourself is something that you value. Being able to negotiate, working, whether you're someone who enjoys, being in the office, whether you're someone who enjoys working from home or being hybrid, that is something that you can also negotiate. I've seen people and I've also, helped and coached people into negotiating educational stipends, making sure that they're getting academic enrichment while they're in these roles. For instance, I helped in one organization, I helped individuals to negotiate getting a coaching license while they were with the organization. And so it's looking at and let me just go back to that. The coaching license, as you know, is valuable in the marketplace because this is just one more skill that you can add to your resume. This is just, one more, element about you that distinguishes you from the competition. And so we're not necessarily saying that you necessarily want to put money aside. But if you see that money is not going to be something that the organization can offer, because let's be real, organizations have budgets and they also now have a lot of conversations around equity. So if you're coming in looking for a director's role and all of the directors are being paid within a certain band and you're asking for something outside of that band, you're now being paid in an equitable amount of money. And that company is going to raise scrutiny because the question is how and why are they paying you this much more than the band? So you might have to stay within band. However, there might be other perks that you can negotiate. And it's always important to do your homework when you're looking at what are some of the other elements that are going to be important for me. Memberships to organizations. There's a great organization which I was a member of, and where, the company I was working for at the time could not pay me the amount of money I wanted. However, I negotiated them paying for my Chief membership. Chief is an organization that is for executive level women. And I can't tell you how awesome it was to be a member of Chief and to be able to have access to, webinars and meetings with people like Amal Clooney and being able to, sit in on great thought leadership conversations that made me a better employee, but also inure to my personal benefit as well.
Mm. And that's so important, the personal development and having your employer pay for it. I like to negotiate perks when you're able to do that. It's, my son is looking for a new job right now, and he had been talking to a recruiter, and "But there's this job, it pays X amount of dollars a year, but there's no PTO." I'm like, "No PTO? What do you mean? What is this? Is this a 1099? Like, is this a real job? We need PTO." And like we were talking about the pros and cons, and I'm like, yeah, it's significantly more than what his current job is paying him, but there's no PTO. And I thought, well, so you lose the money, you take time off, and then you basically have to discipline yourself to save. what are the chances of you doing that? Because that younger generation, they don't like to save, they like to spend. When you think about transitioning from, we talked about, being prepared to leave, how do you know when you're ready to exit the workforce?
You find that you are obsessed with what the next step looks like. So you're no longer, I feel like people who make a healthy departure are people who are obsessed with the next opportunity as opposed to feeling as though they're sticking it to their current organization. The people who are leaving with, some sort of vendetta or with some sort of, feeling of spite, I find
Hmm.
that oftentimes because they're so clouded with that negativity, they're not actually focused on the next horizon. And as a result, they make mistakes as they're leaving the organization. For instance, they might not have been negotiating for the severance that they should have been looking for. They might not have been negotiating for the departure communications that they should have been looking for. Those are some of the elements that I find that people might miss.
Mm.
Now, the people who are, focused on, look, I'm looking at the next opportunity. I'm looking at, adding value to this other organization, or I'm interested in launching my own organization so that I can meet a certain population where they are. These are people who I find who are mindful. These are the people who are taking the steps, not the leaps, not the jumps, but the steps in terms of understanding what does that next role require. They're obsessed with making sure that they're getting the credentialing, getting the information and content that they need to position themselves for those kinds of opportunities. They're also creating more external visibility. External visibility is the currency that most people waste in their organizations, and I'm guilty of it too at times. When you're working as a busy professional, you're juggling the family, you're juggling your health issues, you're juggling so many different things. It is very easy to let the external visibility go to the wayside. What is external visibility? It is getting out there and being a thought leader, being someone who is present in your industry as a voice.
Mm.
You're at the conferences, you're at the meetings. Those are the people who oftentimes are not even looking for roles, they're tapped for roles because people know that they know what they're talking about.
Mhm.
People have confidence in them because they've demonstrated their capability. And the nice thing also is that when you're looking at that external visibility, your internal visibility in an organization can also benefit. And where you're also now on this bigger platform in the name of your organization, making your organization look good. And so I find that when people are ready to make that leap, sometimes they're tapped. Sometimes they, like I said, are obsessed with figuring out how do they pull together this new package. And they start to think about, how do I make sure that I'm not burning a bridge here,
Mhm.
but instead leaving as a positive alum?
Wow, that was very powerful. Thank you so much for sharing all of those. And I loved how you included all the details and brought us through that line. I was just picturing that, as we have this journey we get to, and it's all about making that choice and deciding, like, this is what I want and let's do it. And that's the only thing that ever holds us back is ourselves and our own belief patterns that say, well, I don't know if I can do it. It is scary. I definitely agree. You had said earlier that the most common thing is fear. And, when we think about the fears, you always have two choices. And, what's going to happen if I go through it and what's happening if I don't? And if you don't, obviously you're just going to stay stuck in this cycle. And then you're going to wish. And, we always say, you know, the regrets that we have on missed opportunities. And it's like, I should have. And I know for me, I first feel it in my body. Like when I know a decision is right, it's a firm yes. I feel it in my gut, and I'm like, yep, I can do this. And but it's still looking at the pros and cons, and it's like, okay, am I crazy? What do I really want to do this? I remember I retired 2.5 years early, and my husband was not on board. It's like, oh, I don't, I was just starting. I'd been online for a year, and the whole goal was to build out. I was doing a different niche online coaching, and my husband's like, oh, I don't know, and like checked with my financial advisor. I'm like, yeah, no, I can retire. I'm gonna go, and I did. And I always think I never in a million years thought I would retire 2.5 years early. I mean, I told everybody my retirement date is June of 24, and I retired in December of 21, and it was, huge. But it was, I knew it. I knew when I was ready. And I remember sitting across, the desk from thousands and thousands of people, in just my hometown who I'm thinking about retiring, and give them the numbers, like plan out their retirement, tell them, like, this is what's going to happen. This is how much you're going to get. And I, I'm not ready. I'm just not ready. Well, you'll know when you're ready. When you're ready, you'll know, you'll just go.
You
Hmm.
didn't just leap. You took the steps. You said, okay, let me get some evidence backed data
Hmm.
to determine whether or not this is something that is timely. So you felt the signal. Something in you said, yeah, this is no longer where I want to spend my days and my time.
Hmm.
And and I'll admit, if we were coaching, I'd actually press to figure out what was that, because that is a part of your trajectory.
Hmm.
Whatever that signal was, that's a signal that oftentimes will show up again and again in your life.
Hmm.
So I find that when people are ready to make that move, it is just so important that you don't just simply say, I don't have all the answers right now. It's time to get the answers.
Yes, definitely. Well, thank you so much, Natalie, for sharing all that wisdom. Tell us, what's the best way for our audience to connect with you?
You can always connect with me at natalieholderspeaks.com. I love going into organizations and helping them to have a better sense of how do we treat our people better, so
Mhm.
that hopefully our people aren't feeling a signal, so that our best people are feeling like, yes, we want to stay. I also enjoy working with small businesses through my company, my advisory company, Quest Employment Initiatives. That's where I coach and advise and provide employment law information to small businesses, startups, and founders, helping them to protect what they've built.
Mm. Well, that's amazing. Thank you so much again. For those listening, please check the show notes and connect with Natalie on her site, natalieholderspeaks.com. And you don't have to do any of this alone. If you're thinking, I really want to leave my 9 to 5, or I even just want to ask for a raise, or maybe a different position. Maybe you're not in the right position. You have choices. You just need to gather the information and make a decision that's in alignment with what your goals are, so that you get up every single day and enjoy making the money that you make. Because remember, it doesn't matter how much money you have, it's what you do with it.
If today's episode helped you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with another entrepreneur who's ready to build wealth with confidence. And if you're ready to go deeper, come join us inside The Smell of Money, where we turn these conversations into action. Before you go, grab your favorite essential oil, take one deep breath in, and slowly exhale. Breathe in cash flow, exhale overwhelm. Breathe in confidence, exhale doubt. Breathe in wealth, and trust the woman you're becoming. Until next time, cash flow, confidence, wealth. This is Lisa Drennon, and you've been listening to I Date Money. Keep trusting yourself, one money move at a time.